me a favor, turn around for me. Turn around. Turn around.
Just being detained.
At 5:11 a.m., Los Angeles didn't wake up. It locked up. Across the city, hundreds of taxis rolled to the curb at the exact same moment. Intersections jammed. Airport lanes froze. Drivers stared into mirrors as DEA and FBI agents moved in from every direction. Weapons low, badges visible, timing perfect. This wasn't a traffic stop. This wasn't a sweep. This was a citywide takedown.
In combination with the interagency, including this FBI, have seized record amounts of narcotics to include record amounts of cocaine, including record amounts of fentanyl.
For years, the taxis had been everywhere. Outside LAX at all hours, parked at luxury hotels, cruising neighborhoods most delivery trucks never entered, always moving, always cash heavy, always invisible. They blended in because they were supposed to be there. That's what made them dangerous. The investigation didn't begin with a snitch or a bust. It began with math. DEA analysts tracking narcotics flow across Southern California noticed something that didn't line up. Massive quantities of drugs were reaching distribution points with almost no detectable transport trail. No freight records, no rental vehicles, no rideshare data. Yet the timing was flawless. When analysts overlaid delivery windows with city transit patterns, one thing kept appearing in the background. Taxi shift changes, late-night drop-offs, early morning airport runs, long-distance fares that never showed up in GPS logs. Someone wasn't moving drugs around the city. They were hiding them inside it. Undercover agents began riding the taxis. Hundreds of trips, different drivers, different neighborhoods. They tracked routes, payment behavior, dispatch calls. Patterns emerged. Certain taxis never picked up street fares, but stayed profitable. Others logged impossible mileage gaps. Dispatchers used phrases that didn't match any passenger request. Hold the trunk, take the quiet route, switch cars. Wiretaps followed. What agents heard wasn't chaos. It was discipline, drivers checking in, dispatch coordinating handoffs, vehicles rotating out of service for maintenance that never happened. By the time Federal Command acted, they weren't guessing. They had mapped the empire. At 4:47 a.m., the order went out. 9 dispatch centers, 4 major vehicle yards, dozens of rolling choke points across freeways and surface streets, all at once. When agents breached the first taxi yard in South Los Angeles, they didn't find repair bays. They found infrastructure, rows of taxis parked with military precision, false floors welded into trunks, reinforced compartments beneath back seats, RFID tags hidden behind panels. Inside those compartments were bricks, vacuum sealed, stamped, cataloged cocaine, methamphetamine, synthetic opioids. By 5:28 a.m., the numbers were already beyond expectations. 1 yard, then another, then another. As the sun rose over downtown, Command received the preliminary count. 8.2 tons of narcotics seized, more than 500 vehicles impounded, $480 million in drug proceeds frozen. But the most important part of the operation wasn't the drugs. It was what came next, because shutting down the cars was easy. Shutting down the people who built the empire was about to get very real. By 5:34 a.m., the citywide freeze turned into something else: confusion. Taxi dispatch phones rang without answers. Drivers who hadn't been stopped tried calling in only to hear silence. GPS units inside the vehicles blinked, then went dead as federal cyber teams cut access to the network that had coordinated the entire fleet. The empire had lost its voice. At the first dispatch center in East Los Angeles, FBI agents breached the doors without resistance. Inside, operators sat frozen at their desks, headsets still on, screens filled with route maps that no longer updated. One dispatcher stood up instinctively, hands raised, before anyone spoke. He knew. Servers were seized immediately. Hard drives cloned, call logs pulled. On one screen, agents found a live rotation schedule showing exactly which vehicles were assigned to which special routes that morning. Those routes matched the stops agents had just shut down. At 5:46 a.m., the first leadership arrest occurred. The man investigators had identified as the network's operational controller was detained in a glass-walled office overlooking the dispatch floor. No struggle, no denial. When agents asked for the keys to the safe behind his desk, he handed them over without hesitation. Inside were burner phones, prepaid debit cards, and a ledger labeled Fleet Maintenance. It wasn't maintenance, it was money, payments to drivers, bonuses for clean runs, penalties for missed windows, everything written in shorthand but perfectly aligned with the wiretaps. At the same time, DEA teams hit the vehicle yards. In one yard near Commerce, agents discovered a mobile workshop built inside a converted trailer. Inside were welders, hydraulic lifts, and dozens of partially dismantled taxi interiors. The compartments weren't added randomly, they were standardized. This was mass production. By 6:02 a.m., arrests were unfolding across the city. A yard supervisor taken into custody while trying to destroy a phone. A senior dispatcher detained at home after attempting to flee through a back alley. A fleet accountant arrested with 3 laptops and $900,000 in cash stacked in duffel bags. By sunrise, 28 individuals were in federal custody, not drivers. Command. Inside one seized server, agents found something that shifted the case entirely. A routing matrix linking the taxi network to distribution hubs in Long Beach, San Bernardino, and Las Vegas. The taxis weren't just moving drugs inside Los Angeles, they were feeding the Southwest. At 6:41 a.m., federal prosecutors were briefed. Emergency indictments were drafted before breakfast. Charges included conspiracy to distribute narcotics, operating a continuing criminal enterprise, and money laundering at a scale rarely seen in transportation-based cases. Bail was denied. Assets began freezing in real time, bank accounts locked, properties flagged, shell companies dissolved with a single court order. And while traffic slowly resumed across Los Angeles, the taxis did not. Hundreds sat impounded behind chain-link fences, doors open, interiors exposed. The illusion of normalcy was gone, because once the city saw the compartments, the welds, the false floors, there was no pretending this had been anything but deliberate. The taxi empire hadn't just moved drugs, it had turned everyday transportation into camouflage. And now, the people who built it were running out of places to hide. By day 3, the case stopped being local. Federal prosecutors unsealed the indictments just after midnight, and the numbers alone sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles. 36 defendants charged, not drivers, not couriers, executives, dispatch leadership, financial controllers, fleet engineers. The charges were sweeping. Conspiracy to distribute narcotics at an international scale, operating a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering through transportation services, federal transportation fraud, asset concealment. Several counts carried mandatory minimums of 25 years. Others opened the door to life sentences. Within hours, the first plea deal landed. One of the senior dispatch coordinators broke. He provided access credentials, backup server locations, and a complete hierarchy of command. Names, roles, pay structures, everything. What prosecutors learned confirmed their worst suspicions. The taxi empire wasn't reacting to demand, it was forecasting it. Using historical ride data, event schedules, and airport traffic projections, the network predicted where narcotics would be needed days in advance. Taxis were pre-positioned, compartments loaded, routes optimized to blend perfectly with passenger traffic. This wasn't street-level crime, it was logistics engineering. By the end of the week, 9 additional arrests were made outside California, 1 in Nevada, 2 in Arizona. A financial facilitator detained at an airport while attempting to leave the country. Assets continued to fall. More than $480 million in accounts, property, and vehicles were frozen or seized. Luxury homes, warehouses, shell companies registered under transportation services that no longer existed on paper by Friday afternoon. Inside federal court, judges were blunt, bail denied, passports surrendered, defendants remanded into custody. Several were transferred to high-security detention facilities, normally reserved for organized crime figures. Behind the scenes, sentencing negotiations accelerated. Prosecutors made one thing clear: cooperation meant decades. Silence meant life. By week 2, 5 defendants had formally agreed to cooperate. Their statements expanded the scope again. The taxis weren't just a distribution tool, they were a firewall. Using a legitimate transportation service insulated the operation from scrutiny. Police avoided taxis, security cameras ignored them. Traffic stops were rare. No one questioned a cab pulling over anywhere, anytime. That protection was gone. Meanwhile, the drugs seized were processed as evidence and scheduled for destruction under federal supervision. 8.2 tons removed from circulation permanently. No rerouting, no recovery. Across the region, supply chains fractured. Prices spiked. Smaller networks collapsed without warning as promised shipments never arrived. And for the first time, traffickers realized something terrifying. Blending in with everyday life didn't make them invisible, it made them predictable. And predictability was what brought the empire down. By the time sentencing began, the taxi empire was already finished. The court proceedings moved fast, methodical, and unforgiving. Federal judges reviewed thousands of pages of evidence, dispatch logs, GPS overlays, financial ledgers, compartment schematics, and sworn testimony from cooperating defendants who had once helped build the system. The sentences were not symbolic, they were final. The lead architect of the network, the man who controlled dispatch, vehicle rotation, and routing logic, received life in federal prison without parole. No reduction, no appeal window that mattered. 3 senior executives followed. 40 years, 38 years, 35 years, each sentence stacked with mandatory minimums tied to continuing criminal enterprise statutes. Fleet engineers who designed and installed the hidden compartments were sentenced to 25 to 30 years. Financial controllers who laundered proceeds through transportation accounts received decades as well, their cooperation shaving only a fraction off sentences that still guaranteed they would never return to normal life. In total, 22 defendants were sentenced to federal prison terms exceeding 20 years. No one walked free. The court ordered the immediate forfeiture of all assets tied to the operation. More than 500 vehicles were transferred to federal custody. None were resold. None were returned to service. They were destroyed, crushed, dismantled, rendered unusable. Each vehicle stripped of its hidden compartments, documented, and then scrapped. The message was clear. These taxis would never move anything again. The dispatch centers were shut down permanently, their licenses revoked, their buildings seized, servers wiped and cataloged as evidence. As for the $480 million, it vanished just as completely. Accounts frozen, properties seized, shell companies dissolved. Every dollar traced back to the operation was removed from circulation. The drugs were destroyed under federal supervision. 8.2 tons eliminated, logged, and gone. And with that, the taxi empire ceased to exist. Not rebranded, not rebuilt, ended. Los Angeles traffic returned to normal within days, but something had changed. Taxi fleets were audited, transportation companies scrutinized. New regulations quietly rolled out that required deeper inspection of vehicles previously considered low risk. What once blended into the background was now under a microscope. Inside criminal circles, the fallout was immediate. Networks that relied on taxis as cover abandoned the method entirely. Routes dissolved, partnerships collapsed. The lesson was brutal and unmistakable. Using everyday systems doesn't protect you. It exposes you. The people who believed they were untouchable are now counting time in federal cells. The vehicles they relied on are scrap metal. The money they moved is gone. And the city that once carried their empire without noticing will never look at a taxi the same way again. In the months that followed, the operation became a case study, not a headline, a manual. Federal agencies circulated internal briefings outlining exactly how the taxi empire worked, how it blended into traffic patterns, exploited public trust, and used legitimate transportation rules as camouflage. The lesson was simple and unsettling. Crime doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it wears a meter and a roof light. Transportation regulators quietly rewrote oversight standards. Random inspections expanded. Data sharing agreements between cities went live. Dispatch systems that once operated with minimal scrutiny were now required to maintain audit trails that couldn't be erased or rerouted. What used to be ignored became measurable. Across the country, similar networks didn't wait to be discovered. They shut themselves down. Fleet owners dissolved companies overnight. Vehicles were sold off in bulk. Dispatch offices went dark without explanation. In several cities, unrelated investigations were quietly closed because the targets had already vanished. The taxi empire had sent a message no one wanted to test. As for the people at the center of it, their futures were already decided. Court records show the first transfers to long-term federal facilities completed within weeks. High security units, restricted movement, no contact except through monitored channels. The kind of incarceration reserved for organized systems, not individuals. There would be no comeback, no rebrand, no quiet return under a different name. The vehicles were gone. The money was gone. The leadership was gone. 8.2 tons of narcotics never reached the streets. 500 vehicles were permanently removed. $480 million evaporated from the criminal economy. And something else disappeared with it: confidence. Because the most damaging outcome wasn't the seizure. It was the realization that a system built to look ordinary had been understood, mapped, and dismantled without a single warning shot. No dramatic chase, no shootout, just precision. The city moved on, as cities always do. Traffic returned, taxis kept rolling. Most people never knew how close they had been to driving alongside a moving distribution network every day. And that's exactly why the case mattered. It proved that scale doesn't protect you. Routine doesn't protect you. Normal doesn't protect you. If you want more investigations like this, the ones that expose everyday systems hiding extraordinary crimes and the real consequences that follow, subscribe now. Because the next empire didn't move drugs in taxis. It moved them somewhere even closer to home.